Hey guys, I'm Sage Valentine and I'm just here to do another review of AMC's The Walking Dead Season 7. This time it's all about Episode 4, so let's just get down to it. Honestly, I do not think that there is trouble in paradise for Rick and Michonne as far as their relationship is concerned, because both characters have different ideas as to approach this situation with Negan. Michonne wants revenge. Michonne wants to kick butt and take names. Rick is just like, I gotta feel this dude out. I gotta keep you safe, Carl safe, Judy safe, everybody else safe. I don't want anybody else to die. We just have to do what he asks us to do. A lot of people online were like, oh, they're gonna break up. Oh my goodness, she's gonna go running to Ezekiel. Oh, she's gonna go running with Negan. I'm just like, nah. Because at this stage right now, save for the whole perfect shot sniper thing, Michonne is pretty much Andrea from the comics. In regards to Rosita, she's pissed at Eugene because Eugene won't go out with them. Her and Spencer, I guess. Or anybody, I assume, to do supply runs because Eugene is still grieving. I assume maybe a couple days have passed since the brutal death of Abraham and Glenn. I would say maybe like 3 days, maybe 4 days. Eugene is trying to keep himself busy. And what he's doing is tinkering with that radio that comes into play in the comic books. And I do believe that if all the rumors are correct and they stick to the timeline they're on, we will find out what he is doing, especially those of you who haven't read the comic books, pretty soon. Now, in regards to Spencer, Spencer got on my nerves this episode. If you watched my reviews last season, you know I've been waiting for Spencer to get his for a long time, and if Glenn had to keep his comic book death, I think that Spencer should keep his comic book fate as well, because Spencer has gone way too far. But I will get to the second part of what I'm talking about. But the first part of what really made me annoyed with Spencer was how Spencer approached Negan like he didn't know who Negan was, and was just like, who are you? While Negan standing there at the gate, and Negan was doing that thing where he smiles with his murder eyes, and was just like holding Lucille over his shoulder like, you've got to be kidding me. Negan? Lucille? I mean, does that ring a bell? I was so happy when Rick walked up behind him, because that situation could have been worse. So much worse. I do believe that Daryl was communicating with Rick in some type of blinking, Morse code type thing. Because of the way that Daryl was blinking, then he kept looking down, then blinking again. And I think that Rick pretty much got the message. And that whole idea of Morse code with the blinks makes a hell of a lot of sense. Negan neutered Rick in front of everybody by making him hold Lucille, the bat that was used to kill Abe and Glenn. That was pretty emotional for him, as well as pretty upsetting for everybody else, including those who were there when the murders happened. I don't know about you guys, but that one part where the camera angle flew or zoomed all the way back reminded me of a reality show. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen on a television show that wasn't one reality show, and it really did remind me of one of the comic book panels. Now, Rick is no longer in control, and he wants to talk to Daryl, and Negan's just like, hell no, you are not talking to Daryl, nope. But I'm just like, too late, they already communicated. I was happy to see Scott walking around in this episode. That's Shaniqua Martin Green's husband, Kenrick Green. Nice dude. I met him in person. It was really cool also that he had a couple lines in the episode, because I've been wondering, like, what's going on with Scott? Like, are we going to see him? I hope nothing happens to Scott this season. Rick has to show Negan around Alexandria, and Rick is just like, I don't want to do this, but to keep everybody safe, I just got to do it. Now, Dwight during this episode is kind of like one of those 8-year-old boys who, for whatever reason, can't show that they like a girl. So they kind of have to pick at the girl, and I feel like he kind of likes Rosita, and the way he pronounces her name Rosita. I was just like, ugh, I can't stand him right now, but I do like him at this point as of issue 160 in the comic book. But Dwight right now on the TV show, not feeling him. And he takes Rosita's gun, Spencer's gun, and asks both of them to go get Daryl's bike, but goes so far as to take her hat off her head and spill out all of her water in her canteen, which to me is a complete a-hole move. Now, Michonne is not the best shot, but practice makes perfect. Unfortunately, while she was practicing, she killed a little deer. And I felt so sad, and seeing her cry only made the scene even sadder. Now, the Saviors are going from house to house in Alexandria, and they're taking out all the furniture. They're taking out mattresses, and Negan takes a soda out of one of the coolers, takes maybe like a sip and tosses it. And a lot of people are like pissed off, like, oh, I can't stand Negan and all this stuff. I mean, really this whole situation with Negan coming early and surprising Rick is nothing more than a power play. It's supposed to get under Rick's skin so that Rick will realize that they have to be ready at all times or else. So let's talk about Negan's thoughts in regards to Maggie, because this should show people that Negan doesn't like killing the weak. Negan, as he said in this episode, does not like killing women. He is anti-rape. I mean, we can argue down to the floor about the situation with the wives, but in no way is he forcing them to have sex with him. And he tells them at all times, if you want to leave, you can leave. With no repercussions. Nothing. So, and this happens in the comic book. So, just so you know, this whole knowledge of Negan's thoughts at this point in regards to what's happening in the show is what I got from the comic book. And yes, the show is following the comic book. Maybe not 100%. But it's somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s. So, Negan inquires about Maggie, and he starts talking about how widows are special, and they are empty after the husband dies, but they don't stay empty for a long time. And I'm just like, oh, he's so gross. Father Gabriel pops up and he creeps out Negan, and I was cracking up at that scene. He was like, here you come, with that collar and that creepy smile. And Negan's like, I'm sorry if I creeped you out. So Rick lies and says that Maggie is dead. All these people on Twitter are like, Maggie's dead? Wait a minute. I'm online like, nah, don't forget. We have not seen Sasha, and Sasha was the person that drove Maggie to the hilltop. Keep that one in mind. Don't worry about it. So Negan takes credit for Abraham's death, but once again he blames Daryl for Glenn's death because he said that Daryl forced his hand. I know there's so many debates online. So many debates. I don't even want to get into that one at this point. We learned that Father Gabriel dug a hole in the ground and I guess put some dirt on top of it. I'm not sure if there's anything in that hole. There might not be, but he did it in preparation for Negan's arrival in the future. So, all of a sudden, we hear this loud gunshot. And when I was watching the episode the first time, I'm like, is Michonne shooting somebody? Like, what's going on? And we learned that it's Carl with a gun. And when Carl recited that line from the comic books, I was having a fit. I believe the line was, and I'm obviously paraphrasing, why don't you leave before we show you how really dangerous we are? And because of this, Negan decides to take all of Alexandria's guns. The guns that they had and the guns that they stole from the satellite outpost. Now, I don't blame Carl for that situation because I believe Negan came there to take their guns anyway. Because if memory serves in the comic books, he disarmed most of the settlements that he and the Saviors came to. I believe that is the reason why at the hilltop they use spears, because they have no guns. none. So Negan meets Olivia, who is supposed to be taking care of keeping track of the guns and the rations of food. And Negan's just like, listen, you guys have this heavy lady looking after the food, and I know I'm not the only person who's questioning this. He was like, so I'm not taking your food because it doesn't look like you have much, and if you guys starve and you die, I don't get my supplies, so here's a plus for you. And he tells Rick that Rick basically forced his hand. Now, Negan pretty much doesn't trust Rick, and he thinks that Rick is holding out on him as far as the guns. Then we get to the scene with Spencer and Rosita, and they find Daryl's bike that Dwight asked him to get. Well, he didn't really ask. He was really nasty. He said, go get my bike or go get Daryl's bike or whatever. So Spencer, this is the second time he pissed me off in this episode. He said, this is where Rick got us. It's his fault. He didn't think it through. I'm like, yeah, yes and no. Rick didn't have all the information in regards to what happened when Daryl and Sasha and Abraham dealt with Timmy and the quote-unquote Dick Brigade. Remember with the, what was that, rocket launcher or grenade launcher, whatever that was. Anyway, so Rick went by what Jesus and the people from the hilltop said to him, particularly that one dude whose brother that Rick killed. That's not to blame Jesus in any way, because to be honest, Jesus and the hilltop people didn't realize that Negan's group was that big, nor did they realize that that satellite place was one of many places. So we were finally fully introduced to this new character, a new savior named Arat, who reminds me so much of Laura, one of the characters from the comic books. She may have a different hairstyle, but she just reminds me of Laura so much. And I hope that we get to learn a little bit more about Arat in the series, the TV series. So Arat realizes that Alexandria is short on guns. And Negan is not happy about that. So of course he blames Olivia, and he makes it clear that he does not enjoy killing women. He can kill men all the live long day, but there's something about killing women. So that's another sign that Negan has a certain, I would say, I wouldn't go so far as to say respect, but he feels some type of way when it comes to women, and I believe it has to do with his wife, Lucille, who, spoiler alert for those of you who didn't read, here's Negan. She had cancer and she died, and I truly believe from reading Here's Negan that is what changed Negan, on top of everything that he went through in the beginning of the apocalypse, the zombie apocalypse. But I think because of Lucille, that's the reason why he treats women the way that he does in the comic books. So pretty much Negan says that Olivia screwed up. And really she didn't, because we learn later that Spencer took the guns. Because I was sitting there wondering, like, who took those 2 guns? I remembered that Carol had some guns. Then I started thinking about the guns that Spencer and Rosita had, but then it dawned on me that Dwight took back those guns. So throughout the entire episode, I was trying to figure out who took those guns, and then it was revealed later that obviously it was Spencer. So Negan basically says, if you guys don't find us these guns, I'm gonna have to kill Olivia. And pretty much Rick is sitting in Father Gabriel's chapel with the Alexandrians. I guess the saviors are still going through all the houses and stuff, and Rick is like, listen, we gotta do what they say to keep ourselves alive. We're gonna have to give up our guns. And quite a few of the people, I think it was Eric, who popped up and said, well, how are we going to retaliate? And Rick is just like, we can't retaliate because it'll get somebody killed. And someone brings up, how about we take some guns and we hide them? And Rick was like, you know what, I thought of doing that, But then my whole thing is, if they catch us with the guns on the road, somebody will get killed. If they come here and they find those guns, somebody will get killed. Either way, someone's going to get killed. Now, this is Rick's mindset right now. But if you read the comic books, you know why Rick is acting the way that he's acting. And I won't spoil that for anybody who hasn't read the comics, because it's pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting twist. So Rick reveals, in order for us to keep the peace, we're going to have to give up our guns. And Eric gets up and Eric's asking, you know, how are we going to deal with Negan? And Rick was like, listen, we got to deal with one thing at a time. At this point, we have to do what he says. And someone brings up the notion of them hiding some guns, an idea that Rick had at one point thought about, but then he realized if they get caught with those guns, it's going to be a very, very big mess. So Rick basically went through Spencer's house, and while he was looking for the guns and everything, Father Gabriel pops up. He tells Rick that he believes in him, and he believes that Rick can get them through this situation, and they will end up on top like they always do. And Father Gabriel says, you know, Michonne isn't around, so maybe she has one of the guns. And Rick was like, nah, she doesn't have one of those guns. So Rick finds the missing guns. Spencer had it. Third time Spencer pissed me off during the episode, hiding guns, almost getting Olivia killed. Negan's like, listen, you guys got to get with the program or someone's going to die. And then some of the saviors start leaving as Rosita and Spencer return. Rick sees Michonne. She's got the deer over her shoulders. I think she's holding the gun. And he asks Negan for a second. And at first, Negan doesn't give it to him until he says, I think it was either please or please, sir, or something like that. And then Negan smiles and lets him go. So Rick talks to Michonne in that small little scene that I thought was a sweet scene. And he tells Michonne, listen, I need you to give me the rifle. I have to give it to Negan. He was like, I don't want to lose anybody else. So Rick tells Negan that Michonne was out hunting. And Negan kind of smiles at her a little bit. And I remember, on a side note, I'm going to have to bring this up, that there was a girl on Tumblr. And she had this problem because she felt like all the other women, save for Michonne and Sasha, were not getting hollered at by Negan, particularly Michonne. And I was like, you know, if you watch the first episode, not that this is like a really big important point, but if you watch the first episode in this season, look at the way that Negan looks at Michonne as she's trying to talk him out of cutting off or having Rick cut off Carl's hand. And then especially in this episode where he makes the comment that he loves, and this is Negan, that he loves a gal that buys him dinner and doesn't expect him to put out. Obviously, Negan is not going to come to Michonne and try to mack it to her in front of Rick, because he doesn't know anything about the relationship between those two, but obviously he seems to have an eye for her. But then again, don't forget, on a side note, before Rick and Michonne got together, Rick was always looking at Michonne's butt. He was always acting a certain way. So the way that these characters act is pretty subtle. So the way that Negan is acting towards Michonne is very subtle. Very. So Rick begs Negan to let Daryl stay at Alexandria. And Negan says, well, maybe Daryl can plead his case and sway him, and maybe he'll stay, and Daryl won't say anything. Daryl won't say a word. Some people think that Daryl got his tongue cut out. Me personally, I think that Daryl doesn't want to say anything because he doesn't want something to happen to somebody in Alexandria, and he just wants to keep everybody safe. But that tongue thing, though, I hope that didn't happen, because nothing like that happens in the comic book as far as I've read. Unless, of course, something crazy like that's going to happen in the future, in a future story, at a future place. Okay. Negan tells Rick, listen, you guys need to have something interesting for me when I come back, or someone else is going to die. Dwight once again tries to mack it to Rosita, and he tells Daryl, and this is after he gets that motorcycle, that All you have to do is say the word Negan and you can have it back, and Daryl won't say it. If we were dealing with Murder Beard, Murder Coat Rick, I do believe that Rick would have bashed Negan in the head with Lucille, but unfortunately, after all that has happened, Rick holds himself back because he's got to keep everybody safe. Now, Negan says a line from the comic books right into Rick's ear, and I'm not going to censor it. He said that he slid his penis down Rick's throat, and Rick thanked him for it. Negan is something else. Now, Rick and Daryl say a wordless goodbye. That's really, really sad. And right before Rick closes the gate, he looks up at the sign outside of Alexandria that says, "Mercy for the lost, vengeance for the plunderers." So for those of you who didn't pick up on that, just know vengeance is coming in a very big way. So Spencer's mad that Rick took the guns that he had hidden to save Olivia. He's salty because of this. He was hoarding food and liquor. And Rick tells him, listen, you're small and weak and you got lucky that the walls came up when they did. And Spencer says, we should have made a deal, and makes a really nasty comment involving Glenn and Abe, and Rick is like, listen, say another word and I will break your jaw and knock your teeth out. And I was like, I kind of wish that he had. I really wish he had. Rosita was pissed when she finds out that Spencer was hoarding guns, and Spencer reveals to her that he had those guns because he didn't trust Rick. And we learned that Rosita had a gun in the wheel well of the car that she was driving. So Rick and Michonne have one last conversation, whereas Michonne reveals that she's upset that Rick took her gun because that was one of the guns from the satellite outpost. And unlike Alexandria, they didn't have a tally of how many guns that they lost. At least they think they didn't have a tally, because knowing Negan, they probably did have a tally. But anyway, as of that point, there was no mention of that particular gun. So Michonne was like, you know, we could have hidden more guns. And Rick was like, nah, that's not a good idea. And she was like, well, we could go attack them with the hilltop, which comes into play later when we reach all-out war. And Rick is like, no, they have more numbers than we do, and they really, really do. So Rick decides that this is the time, as he is, because in the scene he is making up the bed that they have on the floor, and it appears that he gave Michonne a bigger pillow, somebody said that on Tumblr, than he has. So that's pretty much going to be their bed, and pretty much everybody else has to sleep on the floor as well, at least the ones who lost their mattresses, because not everybody lost their mattresses via the Saviors. So Rick reveals that he knows that Judith is not his child, and he talks about his best friend Shane, you know, Shane from season 2, and how he had to accept that Shane and Lori got together and that Judith is more than likely Shane's child. And he blamed himself for people dying, and Michonne said it's not your fault, and Rick says we have to accept the life that we're dealing with right now in regards to Negan and the Saviors. And Michonne says that she's going to try to accept that. And then later in the episode, she is out on her own, just walking around, and she sees all of those mattresses that the Saviors took from Alexandria, and they're all piled up, and they were set on fire. And pretty much that reveals that that whole situation was not only a power play, but it was all just a game to mess with Rick and the rest of the Alexandrians and Team Family. So Michonne is really, really upset, and I don't blame her. And at the end of the episode, Rosita asks Eugene to make her a bullet. So in tonight's episode, episode number 5, we are going to see what happened to Maggie and Sasha, and I cannot wait to see that. We're going to see Gregory in all his splendor, and he's yet another character I cannot stand. And you'll see why tonight. And I'm so happy that Xander Berkeley is going to be appearing on The Talking Dead, because I cannot wait to hear him speak, because he is a great actor and he always plays one of those characters that you can't stand, but he plays it so well. But anyway, guys, stay tuned for my review of episode 5 of AMC's The Walking Dead. I love you all. Take care. Bye, guys. Bye.